Let's get started. First of all, I'd like to thank the audience for joining our webinar today, Simplified SAP Carve-Outs for Divestiture Success. I'm Miranda Burke, and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at S&P and your host. Today's 30-minute webcast is being recorded, and all registrants will be sent the link to the recording at the end. Questions can be asked at any time via the chat function on the side of your screen, and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. Now introducing my colleague and expert today, Darren Shaw. He is our VP of Technical Partnerships. Darren, I welcome you to the floor. And with that, I am passing it over to you.
Thank you, Miranda, as always, and welcome. Welcome everyone to the next part of our S&P Data Dialog Series. I almost forgot what we were doing. So let's kick this off. So if we start with some background slides, just to lay out some context for you, okay? Like everything else, best intentions can go awry. One of the challenges that has been plaguing the industry with regard to divestitures is the issue around value, right? There's many reasons why value can be impaired. If we can go back, Miranda, to the prior slide. Thank you so much. There's a number of reasons why, right? Some of it has to do with pure communication. There's some valuation 101 things that can happen. It could be bad timing within the marketplace. You know, there could be an underestimation of the buyer interest. You know, the global economy can have an impact on appetite for acquisition. There are some periods of time when a deal has to be really, really good versus sometimes when a deal can be good enough, right? But what they have found is that organizations that are serial acquirers and divestors end up doing much better in the market from a total return to shareholders. Typically an average of about 5.2% better year over year. So there is a value to that strategy, but to many that's a very, very challenging strategy. You know, acquiring or divesting a company is not easy. So in order to do that as part of a regular strategy where you're selling and buying organizations multiple times a year, you have got to have a strategy in place. You've got to have a playbook in place, and you really need to be seasoned in terms of what works and what doesn't, and making sure that you understand the valuation of what you're buying and also the value of what you're selling. As with anything, there is a process, which I'll show you on this next slide. It's not particularly complex. There's the decision to carve out an entity, and again, that could be part of a serial process. Or it could be a one-time event based upon a change in strategy or something going on in the marketplace. There is discussion about if it's a spin-off, for example, as opposed to selling it. In the case of just a spin-off, well, what is that philosophy of that new company going to look like, right? The operating model, what's going to be its charter, essentially taking what was once maybe a business unit, which was not a separate legal entity, and trying to create what is this independent entity going to look like. The separation plan is fairly similar regardless of what kind of divestiture it is. Some of the options and trade-offs are related to what kind of divestiture it is, a spin-up or a spin-off, a sale versus something else. But regardless, the common philosophy is that the entity should be self-sufficient and it should be simple, right? In terms of the management and what is presented either to the buyer or presented to the market as a standalone entity. If you're starting from a place of simplicity and clarity, is going to attract investors into the stock of that new company, assuming that it goes private. It will attract PE investors if it's going to remain private for a period of time, or if it's going to be acquired, again, being the acquirer being able to simply understand what are the value points, what are those key value drivers, and how easily or difficult will it be to integrate into an existing organization. And of course, obviously, the less fat on the bones of this new structure, the better for all concerned. There are benefits for the carving out company, right, or the divesting company and the divestee, I guess, which we'll show you in this next slide. The divesting organization, beyond the sale or the spin-off of a viable entity that either attractive to investors or attractive to a buying organization, the divesting company also has an opportunity to optimize during this process, right? So, for example, say I'm running a shared services organization and I'm selling off a big part of my business. Well, that shared services organization, whether it's IT, finance, HR, or some combination thereof, was staffed up for a certain amount of volume. Now, if I sold a major part of my business or even a small part of my business, I then say, look, here are opportunities to optimize, and there may be some stranded costs, right? And now the definition of a stranded cost would be, again, in that case where I might have an overstaffed shared services organization, right? So I want to reduce those stranded costs. And maybe those individuals working within the shared services organization could transfer to another part of the business because there's value in what those employees know. And maybe we, as opposed to just letting someone go, say, look, well, where can we reduce or eliminate hiring requisitions and let those people move on to other areas? Right now, a certain part of those costs, right, the transferable costs before that you'll see in the second column, goes with that entity, right? So then once you get to this, the first stage in this post-divestiture target, then you take advantage, in theory, of the opportunity to further optimize costs, right? So now that I have a leaner organization, does this give me an opportunity to overhaul my IT support costs, overall finance processes, and so that's where the companies should take advantage of this opportunity, right? So now that I am one business unit or one division short, what does that do for me in terms of changing my strategy within the marketplace? Where should I be investing my money? And therefore, let's use some cost opportunities to get leaner, to get meaner, but also then to invest in either R&D or wherever else that would align with that new corporate strategy, right? So what are those various takeout levers and those new investing priority areas? Now, as I mentioned, for example, that it could be a process or it could be IT, right? And there's a lot of IT opportunity costs, or rather, IT opportunities for you to take costs out or to improve processes. On the next slide, I'll show you an example of where the technology aspect comes into play when thinking about that divestiture. The pyramid, the overall divestiture value pyramid, there's two components to it, right? There is the preparation. So if I'm divesting an organization, I need to prepare this, right? So I need to prepare the entity to look as attractive as possible, right? So the area in blue here, right? So there's the guiding principles, which is more of a strategy or a philosophy of why I am spinning off entities. If I'm a serial divester, as I mentioned previously, or kind of what the guiding principles are to ensure that this is a good deal, right? It's a well-timed deal. The profitability and the opportunity is what I expect, particularly if I'm selling it off. Am I going to get maximum return on those assets that I'm selling? But there's two areas where IT comes in. Number one is the operating model, right? So buyers are going to want to know what each part of the business contributes to the customer value proposition, right? And so therefore, I, as the divestor of this business, selling this business, I have got to be crystal clear in what those value levers are and exactly what they contribute, right? So that requires data, and data comes from, effectively operating IT systems, right? And so that data has to be clean, it has to be accurate. And the way that I have my systems integrated, I have to make sure that I'm not duplicating data or putting a bunch of garbage into my analytics systems, which are going to tell me and value and rank those parts of the business that are each contributors to the overall customer value prop. In terms of the carve-out, okay, so I need to make sure that I am not only the physical carve-out of the business, as in maybe a dedicated plant or a dedicated office building, but also the carve-out from a systems perspective, right? And this is where it can get a bit dicey, which I'll talk about momentarily. But making sure that I carve out the right component that represents the organization. I can't carve out too much, I can't carve out too little. And what I do carve out has to be accurate and it has to be complete. Also, which is of particular importance because, again, what might have been a business unit early on is now could potentially be a legal entity if it's a spin-off and I'm not selling it per se, or if I am selling, again, the balance sheet has to balance and the profit and loss statement needs to be complete, whether it's a public entity or a private entity. So that, again, that also involves data and systems. And then therefore, if I prepared it, that being the value proposition statement, I have to communicate it properly, right? So I have to provide detailed metrics to articulate that business value. The business, a buyer, if it's a sell-off, will need to be able to validate what I've put in the prospectus. So they're going to want to do during due diligence. They're going to want a deep dive, right? So it all has to be proven, not just what I've typed out in a document that my bank is representing to the public in terms of putting this out there for all, right? And also, accurate analytics on my side are going to be key to talk about what is beyond just the value of the assets that someone may be buying, right? So if I'm divesting this business, it has current cash of X, it has this current market share, these are the products, this is the gross margins. But what's going to be more attractive to a buyer is going to be what more can be done, right? In the hands of a competent buyer, this X could be, X value could be 1.7 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 over some sort of period. But again, you've got to, when selling that, you've got to have a basis for making those statements. Again, that ties back to accurate data, and that ties back to clean systems, and that ties back to an analytics tool that's pulling the right data from the right place and articulating it in the right way. From an SAP standpoint, this is where it gets a bit dicey, and this next diagram is going to show you best case scenario and probably worst case scenario. So best case scenario, if you're carving off a system from SAP, if the business is held in a holding company structure, that's a cakewalk, right? You're carving out 1 or 2 legal entities, right? Which may, in a holding company, may be sitting in its own SAP environment. Very little intercompany, very little shared warehouses, shared plants, shared service centers, distinct employees. You're essentially taking a nice package. As a holding company, this is my business. They run their own systems. They run their own SAP systems. Either just hand off those IT assets if it's in a data center or it's in its own cloud, fairly clean cut, right? That is a rare instance. What we're finding is that over time you have something that looks more like the diagram to the right. which can scare people because you may be sharing company codes, you're sharing controlling areas, you may have part of a plant, there may be shared inventory. If you have a company that's leveraging grouping, pegging, and distribution, and that grouping and pegging is across different business units, across different programs, trying to carve out what is owned by that business unit or entity that you're trying to sell off or carve out, that makes this, from an IT perspective, it can be a nightmare. So this is beyond just carving out one or two company codes. It is a company code and maybe parts of another company code, parts of a plant, part of a warehouse, part of a sales organization. You may have employees that do work across organizations. So even if you're just trying to carve out something like the hierarchy structure, that's part of it, and that alone can be highly complex. Let's say, however, that you are also carving out an entity that has a lot of long-term projects, right? Multi-year projects that might be part of an overall program. So you're also having to deal with, okay, well, not only am I carving out all data, right? I've got to think about, well, how many years, do I have to go back, right? So clearly, in some cases where there's no longer a statutory period to hold or retain certain data, let's say it's 40 or 50 years, 50 years back, the buyer may still want that anyway, right? So there's a lot of things that need to be considered when kind of defining what does that SpinCo, if you will, look like. And as you see from the red here, it can be very, very messy. But there's a way to overcome that. And we'll show you that in this next slide here. So how do we do it? All right, so it starts with a very deep system analysis, right? So beyond the application data, right, what does the hierarchy structure look like? And then if there are company codes that are clearly associated, great, right? And it makes it a bit easier. But then beyond that, though, we need to understand what are the entities that will be part of this carve-out or this spin-off. It could be clean cut, but then it could be a whole plant or part of a plant. But that data analysis up front to understand the actual volumes of data, the years that go back, what data elements that might be associated with that this to be carved out entity rather, are maybe there for historical purposes, but are no longer active organizational units, right? They are no longer an active organizational representation. And that kind of gets into the decision of, does the buyer want that anyway, or if it's dated, if it's so far dated, why hand them over garbage that they're not going to use, right? So it also provides an overview of, again, when that entity in operation, there could be opportunities for cleanup. If you haven't done that already, which you probably should have, just from a good housekeeping perspective, but if not, you want to look at customizations and how many of those customizations are actually used. And you can take this opportunity to clean up what it is that you are sending over to that buyer, or cleaning up the organization so that it starts fresh and it starts lean, which gets back to one of the first slides that we talked about in terms of what makes an optimal carved out entity, right? Lean and mean and clean. For a buying entity, we make a copy of the application data, and then we can move over only that data that is required for this particular transaction, right? So whether it's a carve out or someone is acquiring, let's move over complete data, clean data. And in some cases, if it's so far out in the past it makes no sense, no need to bring it over. But if it's a highly regulated industry where you need to bring over all of your history, let's say nuclear power, for example, where you've got to go back a minimum of 50 years, you're going to want to bring over all, right? But the good news is about the way that we do that mapping is that for every transaction, we have traced every transaction, every document to every other supporting document that may go all the way down in that process, right? So a transaction, a procurement transaction will tie all the way to the master data for that raw material or work in process. And so the way that we have our automation set up is that no document or no transaction gets left behind. And how do we know that? We know that because we have a series of verification tools that are embedded in our software, so that we take the snapshot of what that entity looked like in its various pieces of particular hierarchy elements and the transactions associated with that entity. We trace all of that data and all those tables, all those transactions over to the source or to the target, excuse me. And then we are able to do a tick and tie, again, via automation, tick and tie, and make sure that everything that was here, it all moved over, and it's now in its target, which is fairly easy to do. Let's say, for example, if it's ECC and you're carving out the elements in ECC, say 6, and all that's going to be put into an EC6 system, right? So if it's a spin-off, for example, it's not being sold. If they're just going to run another ECC6 system, makes it a lot easier. In some cases, there are buyers or entities who want to take this opportunity. If they're doing a carve-out, let's carve out from ECC and let's move to S/4HANA because I want to establish my clean digital core for future transformation and future innovation. There's an instance with a customer who I can't mention the name. However, it's a case where one company sold off its business to another company, and that company wanted to take this acquisition and use that as an opportunity to move that into an S4 environment, although it was coming from an ECC environment, and want to take the opportunity to upgrade its own systems and therefore also upgrade this new entity that's buying, convert that into S4, and then migrate up that and integrate it with its own S4 environment. That makes for a bit more of a messier transaction from a carve-out perspective, and then a systems merger or data merger in this case. But again, our software not only does, I guess, be assumed in the obvious of being able to map, take something from ECC and put it into ECC. You better get that right. But we're also able to automatically map, in the case of a transformation opportunity, in that same go live, be able to map that to latest version of, say, S/4HANA, right? All that is done through predefined migration objects that, again, leaves no bit of data behind. Good news is that these kind of projects, whether it's a straight ECC carve-out into a new ECC system or S/4HANA, these kind of projects can be done within 6 to 9 months on average. And using automation, it's faster, ends up being cheaper, and then far less delivery risk and far less operational disruption as well. And so, again, the good news is that you're either giving the buyer a clean slate from which to work with, or you're setting up that new environment, that new company that may be independent as a clean environment. If you go to the next slide, I'll tell you some proof points, because you say, okay, this sounds good, great. Can you do this in 6 to 9 months? Okay, prove it. Here's an example. We were involved in the largest corporate split in history, which involved well over 150 terabytes of data. That split of Hewlett-Packard into 2 entities was done within 6 months. DuPont, which is a cereal acquirer and divestor, our tool set is part of its ongoing acquire and divest playbook. Anytime that they acquire or spin off a new business, we are involved because we have proven our credibility in there, and they therefore have confidence that we will do this. Kohl's, as another example, was a carve-out. It was done within 6 months, and that was a carve-out into its own freestanding legal entity. That included all pre-projects. It also included a move to the Azure cloud. Airnov, same thing, 6 months, about 6 to 9 months for that one. 6 legal entities, 12 plants, 5 purchasing organizations, and you see, Energy Harbor and a lot of these, we're also including a cloud move in that same go live, right? So it's not just you're wrestling with the carve out; it's a rapid carve out with a whole bunch of other projects that can be tacked on within that same go live. So there are other examples that might fit with your particular industry. We have a success story for each one. But I'll leave it with this in this last slide. If you're looking to divest, if you have a divestiture that's planned in the near future, or you are a serial acquirer and divester and need a trusted tool in your toolkit to accelerate carve-outs and acquisitions that are SAP related, please speak with us. We can either make your one-time event a success and done in far less time than most companies do it on their own using traditional means, or again, ensuring that you are maximizing deal value on an ongoing basis as a serial acquirer or divester. We can help add even more value than you're already getting, adding more return to shareholders. So with that, Miranda, I'm finished. If there's any questions, I'm not sure we have that much time left, but anything?
Excellent, Darren. Thank you so much. I know we covered a lot of information in 30 short minutes, so don't worry. We'll be sending you the PowerPoint and recording via email after. And also include other resources such as blogs and customer success stories, and would love to invite you guys to our next webinar with SAP in March, and that's about Rise Faster with SAP and SNP. And as you can tell for how busy my team's notifications are, SNP is hitting the road in March. Next week, we will be sponsoring the SAP Aerospace and Defense Conference, where our customer Northrop Grumman will deliver a results-oriented discussion on their approach to the data migration project with SNP. The following week, we're at the SAP Digital Supply Chain Conference, and then following that, we are at the SAP Insider Conference towards the end of March. So busy couple of weeks coming up. Looking at the questions. How far ahead should you plan for an SAP carve-out?
Again, if you're a serial acquirer, really that strategy should be thought about when you identify the business that you want to potentially sell off. Knowing ahead of time and having that playbook in place, really it can't start too early. But luckily, it can be accomplished quite a lot faster. But also part of that is a strategy where you might say, look, I know I'm going to sell this off within a couple of years. You can do the carve out in advance, put it, say, in the cloud, easily integrate that system with your remaining SAP environment, and then once you're ready to sell, flip that cloud-based SAP system over to whoever's going to buy it, or if it becomes standalone. So there's things that you can do well in advance in terms of cleansing and getting it in tip-top shape and making it look as valuable as possible. Very early in the process.
And with that, we are at the top of the half hour. Again, thank you, Darren, for your time today and for the audience for joining. As soon as I end the webinar, you'll be prompted to submit a quick survey. It will take you less than 30 seconds. We appreciate your feedback. And with that, wishing everyone a great Wednesday. Thank you so much for your time.